Today's edition of MacVoices is supported by MacPaw, the maker of Clean My Mac X. Visit macpaw.com/podcast to download your copy and use the code MacVoices to save 5%. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we're all still in lockdown. Some of us are starting to come out of lockdown. Some of us are still going to be in lockdown for a little while. But I felt like it was a good time for us to discuss some of the lessons that we're going to learn from a business perspective about or from COVID-19, from the lockdown, how it's affected business, how it will affect business, some of the good things we've seen, some of the challenges that have been, and maybe what needs to be adapted. And for that, I put together a fantastic panel. I think they're fantastic, and I know you will too. So let's get to the panel, and then we'll get to the topic. First up, and I'm going to go around my screen just because this is the way they appear on my screen, Mr. Barry Fulk. Barry, welcome. It's good Chuck. To see you.
Thanks. Great to be on again. It's definitely been an interesting couple of months for me, and looking forward to kind of sharing some of my thoughts, things that are changing, and how I think things will change in the future.
Great. Well, that's what we're here for. Next to him, I got Mike Rose back on the show. Mike, it's good to see you.
I'm like a cicada. You know, I come back every 17 years, whether you want me or not. But it's great to see you again. And yeah, absolutely a very important topic of discussion today. So I'm glad to be here.
It's a pleasure. And last but absolutely not least, the guy that we always look to for business commentary, Mr. Mark Fuccio. Mark, welcome. It's good to see you.
Hi, Chuck. Thanks for the invitation to be back here again. And to hide my COVID hairstyle, I'm going to wear a cowboy hat. This was inspired by Brian Chafin the other day. He was a guest on your show, and you were talking about different quality hats, and his was black and mine is white. So I figure I'll wear it, and hopefully Brian will see it. And for people who know stuff out there about hats, all I know is this is a 5X Beaver rated hat. So that's all I know. And you have to go to a store in Texas where I bought this, between Dallas and Fort Worth. You have to go to a store down there and then explain to you all the quality factors and ins and outs of what makes for a good hat.
And I don't have anything to say to that except nice hat. And it does look like, because you're using the background feature, that you're phasing in and out occasionally with the hat, but you're fully present, I know. So it's good to have you.
Thank you, guys.
So, guys, you heard the intro, and we obviously had some discussions pre-show about this. It just feels like that the lockdown has accelerated maybe some changes that were coming to business. It's made us all do some experiments that maybe we wouldn't have done in business if we hadn't been forced to by this. And I feel like there's some lessons to be learned, some changes that are coming, and I wanted to examine this with three people that have different perspectives on business and on the world of business. So, Barry, how about if we start with you? You are known as kind of a guy that does a lot of travel for business, and this obviously has curtailed that. What do you see coming out of this? Do you see that you will continue to do as much face-to-face, or do you think at least some of it will transfer over to virtual?
Yeah, I think this is definitely the opportunity for virtual meetings and other opportunities to move forward. But I think people have gotten a taste of what works and what doesn't on a larger scale. And I think that's good, because certain things don't work. They're like, oh, we'll get 30, 40 people on a call and it's just disastrous. You spend 20 minutes on all the technical issues and it's not productive. And I think people will have these smaller meetings on a more regular basis saying, hey, I don't need to fly out for a day, come back that evening just to have a face-to-face. I think this will work well. And I think we've learned a lot about technology. We could get literally into some of the products like Zoom that have done, generally, most people have accepted that this is now part of business, not a side part that just the IT people play with. And I think most of all that's good, right? Because there's a lot of productive things when I can still see them. What I would like to see are two things. It's still very judicial use. It shouldn't replace face-to-face, especially when meeting people for the first time or certain cultures. But I'm very curious, and this is something we won't know yet, is where does 5G play in some of this? And I think that's going to be really interesting, where theoretically, with the increased bandwidth, reduce latency, it could make a telepresence situation a lot better because you don't have the weird lag and some of the uncomfortable pauses that we're dealing with. So that's kind of how I see it right now. I think there will be, like everybody wants to race out to the restaurants that are open now. I think everybody's going to race back to their office just to be with people, but then people are going to find a balance. That's my expectation.
Mike, Barry just said, he brought up something interesting, and that's the cultural thing. And one of the cultural things in business has been a handshake, not just as a greeting, but also, the old handshake agreement kind of thing. Do you think that's going to change because of this to a significant degree?
Well, if you're imagining people, disputing their elbow bump contracts, I think, that's going to be a huge problem. But I 100% agree with Barry, particularly on the point of first contact or introductions and the value of having a face-to-face context. It creates so much more trust and so much more ease going forward. I'm in a situation right now where I have 2 new hires who are onboarding right now, who are going to be joining my team in July. And I had the opportunity back in January to go to Indianapolis, where they're going through their training program, and have lunch with them, meet them, sit down and talk to them. Even though I had met them on video repeatedly, I'd been part of the interview process for them. Having that face-to-face opportunity was so important. If for no other reason that I determined that, despite the fact that on Google Meet or on Skype they're the same height, in reality one of them is like my height and the other one is Barry's height. So it's a big difference. And so having those face-to-face introductory opportunities is going to remain really important. I think the increased fidelity, the increased ability to build trust through virtual environments, as Barry said, 5G or decreased latency is going to make a difference. Also, we're starting to see people using virtual environments like games as meeting venues. So I don't know if you heard about this. There was a company where folks are doing their weekly stand-up meetings in Red Dead Redemption 2 around a virtual campfire. And years ago when I was in the events industry, we were trying to do this with Second Life and other technologies. I think it's quite possible that we're going to see some of that finally come to fruition in a more acceptable or a more commonly accepted way. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of, getting everybody comfortable with things like Zoom or Skype or GoToMeeting, but it is astonishing to see the amount of transformation that's taken place, decades worth, in the space of 3 months. Who knows what we will be looking at or what we'll be experiencing another 3 months from now.
Mark, how about you? You have more of a consultant's role, and I'm curious to see if any of your clients have come to you with particular problems that were highlighted by the lockdown and that needed to be solved, or that can be solved maybe going forward, should this become necessary again or become to a lesser degree an ongoing thing.
So I think the broader topic is about business travel. And I agree. I think I'm hearing all sorts of other places that business travel is dead, effectively. It's not to say it's not going to come back, a little bit, but for a lot of intents and purposes, people are finding that technologies like Zoom or Skype, et cetera, even as Mike was pointing out, even video games, are facilitating a way to meet online, and I think that that's part of a maybe broader trend that I think companies have suddenly had a huge impulse, that we've seen over the past 20 years. Slowly, people have done more at home. Sort of 10 years ago, right? It was the whole bring your own device trend as corporations were latching onto that, and there was still a little bit of prejudice, and even out here in the Silicon Valley, there's was a lot of a prejudice that people want to see butts in booths. Unless they can see them, they really don't know is that person not working as hard in the office as they would work at home. And this pandemic has actually showed that people do work and they are effective. And I think the fact that everyone has had to do it at once, has really laid the foundation that we're going to really see large behavioral shifts, just individually as well as corporate wise.
Wow. First of all, I want to make sure that I let the viewers and listeners know we are having some Skype issues, which is why I am not Skype is not my favorite. So if the video is a little choppy or whatever, or the frame rate is down, sorry about that. Hopefully the audio is okay, and we're just going to plug on. That said, Mark, I didn't forget about the bring your own device thing, but it's been interesting to me that with that mentality that so many employers fought for so long, that now when this all happened, I know of a number of businesses that all of a sudden got caught with their pants down because their employees did not have home machines that were powerful enough or current enough to do the work at home. And they were scrambling, trying to find Chromebooks or laptops or whatever of any manufacturing design to let people do some of that stuff so the work could get done. And I think that's something that's definitely going to have to change, is that at any given moment, you're going to have to be able to get onto your company systems or do your company work from home with your device or a company provided device.
Yes, and that is going to bring about faster acceleration of all sorts of remote working technologies, be it collaboration, security, sharing, communication, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be all sorts of things that are going to change as a result of this. The worst thing I hate to be right now is an investor in office or real estate, because if you look, a lot of the REITs, have they got smacked down with the rest of the market when it started to collapse in February. Since then, a lot of the market has recovered to about 2019 year-end levels, but the REITs by and far are down, except for a couple specialized ones that focus in cloud data centers. So we're going to see just dramatic, I think, retooling of what the American landscape looks like.
Mike, from your perspective, are you having any issues working from home, or you're a geek like the rest of us, so you probably had hardware that was more than adequate for anything that they wanted to throw at you. But are you hearing anything from coworkers?
Yeah, it is interesting. I had the opportunity when our office soft closed early in March to go in, get some of my essential peripherals. So like keyboard, mouse and keyboard, the Magic Mouse and a Logitech keyboard, and a few other things that I knew I was going to need if I was going to be working from home for a long time, or I would have to replace. I had a Logitech web camera, one I'm using right now. I actually had a spare. So my inventory of available gear was pretty good, and I wasn't concerned about. I worked on the road frequently. I worked from home frequently, so I wasn't particularly concerned about being properly equipped. What I wasn't prepared for, what I was a little surprised by, number one, was the number of my colleagues who weren't ready for that, who didn't have a external webcam. Even though at our office we have IT vending machines, you can just walk up and swipe your ID and get these things in normal periods of time. So there's no requisition process. There's no logging a ticket. You just go get it. So the fact that people hadn't was kind of surprising to me. But then again, I'm a nerd. But the other thing that was interesting was over the first few weeks, and even to this point of the work from home regime, more and more of my friends and people in my community and colleagues and relatives have been pulling me back into my tech support role, my old IT days. And so I found myself lending out just a tremendous amount of the gear that I've accumulated, a MacBook Pro to this person, and a spare webcam to this other person, and a keyboard and a Fire tablet or an iPad, just sort of everything gradually heading out the door for the large number of folks who simply hadn't at any point prioritized having this stuff, having it available. So it is interesting. I feel extremely fortunate to have been prepared, sort of both technologically, but also sort of from a mindset perspective, to say, yeah, I'm ready for this if I need to be on video a lot, if I need to be helping other people in my family be on video a lot. What I was not prepared for was the impact on my cable provider. And I'm not going to name check them because I'm still angry. But they, the second, third week of March, they just had a miserable time keeping up with demand, and it's understandable. I mean, nobody there at the ISP level was expecting, 3x, 4x, 5x daytime demand for bandwidth that they saw. But nevertheless, for those of us who were stuck working at home, or trying to facilitate online school, online presentations, other stuff that the rest of the family was doing, it was very challenging. I think, I don't want to jinx it, I finally have removed the network problems that were causing my router to reboot. I think I'm back to normal. But being the IT tech, being the equipment manager, being the video producer, and also being the network engineer, that's a lot on top of a full-time job. And I think for everybody who's found themselves in this situation, especially if you have a family at home that's also putting some demands on your infrastructure, the cracks do start to show a little bit.
MacPaw, the maker of Queen My Mac X, is sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. Queen My Mac X is the all-in-one file cleaning and optimizing tool for the Mac. There are others, but none are as trusted as Queen My Mac X. In one fell swoop, Queen My Mac X scans your system for outdated files with the System Junk feature, and also delivers information on your Mac storage space. That's 2 utilities right there, but that's not all. You're not going to wonder what you're doing because Queen My Mac X supports a simple interface, letting you know what you're doing and what you're going to do next, so there are no missteps or surprises. And Queen My Mac X keeps you updated with information on your Mac's CPU load, available RAM, free space, and more. Visit macpaw.com/podcast to download Queen My Mac X today and use the coupon code MacVoices to receive 5% off. Upon visiting macpaw.com/podcast, click the Buy Now button, then scroll to the bottom of your screen to enter the code before completing your purchase. Queen My Mac X is also now available in the Apple App Store. That's macpaw.com/podcast, macpaw.com/podcast, to download your copy of Queen My Mac X and save 5% with the code MacVoices. Do it now and get your Mac up to speed. Thanks to MacPaw for supporting MacVoices.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I was going to kind of tag along. A couple of things that both Mark and Mike said was that we've had a unique opportunity to take 2 months of completely different network usage for our own company and saying, this isn't right for us. Meaning we've used a very traditional, everybody logs into their laptop, they log into VPN, and then they can access all our systems. That wasn't the right model because we completely clogged our internal network. And we were able to reroute through various means certain types of traffic, specifically email. It was still secure. And that immediately made a huge change. I'm like, wait, let's do this on other systems. What can we leverage, whether it's using a Microsoft or an AWS, that allows us to route differently? So that was a fundamental change that would never have probably happened because this isn't normal, but it's also like, well, we have so much good data, let's use it. And the other aspect of this, and Mark, you brought this up, and I completely agree with you with the real estate. We don't need all the buildings we have. And we've leased spaces, we've done temporary locations when we've had some hiring situations. Why? I mean, like Mike and like all of you, I do travel quite a bit normally. So working remotely is not a big deal for me. So I'm just at home. Great. It's nice to see my family. But working away from a traditional office is fine. Yes, I do miss some of that. And I think there should be opportunities to do that. It's going to be weird, though. You're going to get into these, are we going to convert the office to almost 100% hoteling? I don't like that either. So I don't know if we have the answers yet. but I think it's going to create this fundamental shift. And the last piece of this is looking at every new hire. Mike, I think you were mentioning something about that, where I had a very similar situation. I brought in somebody, I met them once in the face-to-face, and then we shut down. I'm like, sorry, buddy, here's all your stuff. And I'm like, wait a second. If you're a salesperson, you're always on the road, I ship you this kit. But if you work in the office, you don't get really much of anything. And I want to change that model and saying you're going to get, maybe it's a docking station or one large monitor. Absolutely, you're going to get a headset and take it from there. So I try to look at it as a positive way of moving us forward into some new realities, but also make it better for everybody and give them that flexibility. We want that work-life balance. And I'm sure we'll talk about how some of us have been challenged through that. But this is, again, I want to come out of it and saying, okay, here's what we've learned. Let's make this better for everybody. We've hopefully all come out of it stronger in some fashion. And let's see what we do.
Yeah. Boy, there's so many ways to go here in so many directions. Although I do want to say I'd like to work where Mike does, where I just walk up and say, I'd like these 17 laptops, please, to just put them in the trunk, and if
you doesn't quite work that way. It's for little things, for webcams or mice or a power adapter. Sure, if I wanted a new laptop, I'd have to have a conversation with somebody. But it is quite nice to have the and actually. It sets an expectation for employees heading into something like this that you are, I don't want to use the word entitled, but that you are expected to have access to the things that you need to do your job. There are so many workplaces and so many environments where it is a battle, or there's a tension between IT and procurement and the rest of the business, because the job of those departments is to not be a cost center, is to hold the cost down. So why would you provision a webcam, or why would you provision an external keyboard or anything like that for someone who is an office-based employee? They're not going to need it. Our perspective, hoping not to hit the microphone at unnamed company that I work at, is that everybody should have the tools they need. And the more friction we can take out of those interactions, the better. Early on, management said, hey, we normally do a $250 allowance of expenses for people who are designated remote employees. And now everybody gets it. It doesn't matter if you used it already, just go ahead. If you need to, I got a lovely standing desk extender. But if you need a monitor, or you need a webcam, or you need a keyboard, just go get it. Like, you don't need approval. You don't need to go through a process. Just do it and expense it. And the difference in productivity and the difference in people being able to do their jobs without stressing out about yet another thing totally outweighs the cost of doing something like that. And that, if you're a leader of an organization, if you're a manager, or if you're someone who's responsible for an IT organization, think of the ways you can take friction out of your employee experience right now. Everybody is stressed. Everybody is dealing with unprecedented challenges and trying to manage as best they can. What can you do to have there be one fewer thing that they have to get stressed out about, whatever it is?
I want to go back to something Barry said about the video conferencing, because I know I'd been advocating video conferencing for a long time, and ironically through Zoom, because Zoom for quite a while before COVID had such a superior experience to Skype or GoToMeeting or WebEx or any of them. And people would, we can use it to meet, but I'm just going to call in, or I'm just going to use the audio function. And they wouldn't turn their cameras on. Mm-hmm. And now they're having to turn their cameras on. And I feel like this is going to be another skill that salespeople and service people are going to have to learn, that even though it's not perfect, I'm looking at you guys, and hopefully I'm looking you in the eye. And that makes a bit of a difference, I think. Mark, am I out of bounds there, or do you think this is going to be a trend that has just been accelerated by the COVID lockdown?
No, I think the trend is here to stay. As I said before, I think this is a permanent change in individual and corporate behavior. Now, maybe people are embarrassed about what their homes look like, because there's been no shortage of comments on Twitter about various newscasters and pundits' homes and backgrounds. I think capped off by a huge amount of commentary when Tony Fauci testified before the Senate remotely, about how he had a 1980s circa cassette player in a shelf in his home office. So I think people get over that embarrassment, but I think that I was at a webinar earlier today, and a fund manager was saying that they estimated through just some, anecdotal, survey, just conversational research with, CEOs of companies they've invested in, that they figure that nationwide, between 20 and 25% of people will avail themselves of opportunity to work from home for the majority of their time. And that's going to drive tremendous changes. To Barry's point of how networking is done, to Mike's point about what sort of equipment they need to have at home or at home and in the office, and do they have a hotel office suite? And this is just virgin territory that we'll have to see how all this shakes out. So on a lot of it. I've been using video conferencing systems of various sorts for a long time, and I found that I think the key benefit to make it successful is you really need to have good quality audio, and then secondarily, the videos may be useful to see a person, but I think it's more about being able to share something on a screen, so again everybody can see something. So if people are saying, "Oh, I'm just going to dial in and I'm not going to look at it," I think people who have that attitude, they're going to be really missing out. Maybe it's excusable if they're driving somewhere in a car, but if they're working from home, where are they going to be driving to? So it's not like you're driving in the morning or at home at night and you're dialing into a conference from audio only. But I think to the extent that sessions like this become the norm, it's going to continue to drive all sorts of other process change in companies. And we can talk about some of them here, just sort of, HR processes, approval processes. We've seen maybe just the tip of the arrow when you think about, sort of web-based tools and, customer-facing, systems and, CRM and support management systems. There are companies out there now that are, taking sort of standard corporate processes and, they're in, remote expense management so that it becomes cloud-based, or signing off and validating, being an electronic notary for signatures, or maintaining tax records and tax filings. These were once sort of in-house functions. They're all now being chipped away and done by companies using cloud technology. So I think that this COVID pandemic is going to accelerate some of those type of trends.
Has anybody run into stories, and if they're at your company, then please don't bring them up. But I know that I can think of at least 2 law firms I've talked to, that they were in a small panic when this started, because boggles my mind, they're still working off of paper files, paper filing cabinets and everything, and they had no idea how they were going to manage this. And I think that this is going to push the paper, maybe not the paperless thing, but it's going to push more and more documents to some kind of centralized server or system, or maybe something just as simple as Dropbox. Where, okay, I can reach into a Dropbox and pull this file out, or get a copy of it, and so can Mike and so can Barry from our respective remote locations, instead of having to walk back to the file room and sign it out.
Yeah, that's been definitely one change that I've seen, both where I work, but also for other companies we work with, where they were much more accepting of electronic signatures. There were processes, because it documented wet ink requirements, that people were just in the habit, print it out, sign it, scan it, God forbid, fax it. And as soon as we shut down, they're like, okay, well, this won't work. We will accept an electronic process. And they thought these through. And it's like, these systems out there, and I'll use DocuSign as one example, is a really easy way to do it. You've got Adobe that can do signatures. You can drop them in. And I'm glad to see that. Again, trying to be silver lining here, but it's like people are used to things and they just don't want to change it. It works. Why should we bother? Well, it's not going to work when you're at home and you literally have to hand it off to somebody else. So those things are good. And I'm pleased. And I'm confident that they will stay that way. I don't think we're going to revert back.
Yeah, I'll back up Barry on that. I think the forcing function of this circumstance has meant that a lot of things that were done manually or done on paper or done on premise, to Mark's point, because there wasn't any real reason, fiscal reason, operational reason, mandated from above to change them. Well, when the circumstances change so dramatically, you simply can't continue doing it that way. So your choice is either abandon the process altogether or digitize. There's no third way. And in fact, I know of companies where they did literally have to send people into the office in order to run to close a month, to run their accounts receivable, because that was not a system that was accessible externally. Like the only way to do it was to physically be in the office. There are companies that are based on a paper contracting process or paper project management that have had to, in many cases, just explore the solutions they looked at, over the past 5 to 10 years, where they had somebody come in and give them a demo and give them a proposal and answer an RFP, and they looked at it and said, okay, yeah, this is fine, but we're not going to do anything right now because it's too much. The change and this is always true, by the way, the change management effort is bigger than the system cost and the implementation cost. The change management effort of getting everybody to do it in the new way is the hardest, most expensive, most challenging part of the project. But guess what? Now you have to. So go back, find that proposal from 3 years ago, call that vendor and say, hey, are you still selling that product we looked at? And they say, sure, we can have it for you. We can spin it. It's in the cloud. We can spin it up for you today. And off they go. So I think that silver lining is such a loaded term. And I agree with what Barry said about it. I think this is a realization that maybe sometimes changing the way you do things is not the end of the world. And when we have an actual flavor of the end of the world to compare it to, look how not the end of the world it is to go from a paper process to a digital process.
That wraps up the first part of our conversation about some of the changes that lockdown has brought to business and will probably continue to bring to business going forward. There's a whole lot more in this discussion, so please check it out on the next version of MacVoices. Until then, I'm Chuck Joyner, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.